Well, yeah,
A dead president.
Prime Minister, President.
He's always referred to as president.
Okay.
Most of the time, so I'm going to call him president.
Okay, so not the guy who swam away from the ocean.
Oh,
No.
Harold
Away
Holt.
from the ocean? Yep.
Yeah, so
He was trying to get
in
away
the
from that ocean.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
It caught up. No, this week we're going to talk about the death of Mozambican President Samora Machel, who died along with 33 other people when the presidential plane, which was a Tupolev Tu-134A3, crashed into a South African hillside on October 19th, 1986. And it's believed by many people to have been an assassination, which was executed by intentionally crashing the plane.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Before we get into the story, I do want to say that this is a listener suggestion. This is an Ash story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we haven't done one of Ash's stories in a long time.
We haven't, and
we
we
sure
haven't
haven't.
even gotten through half of his suggestions.
I know. I didn't realize this was an Ash suggestion until I got to it.
Okay, there you go.
And by the way, Ash, if you're still out there listening, send us another suggestion.
Yeah,
We
because
haven't heard from you in a long time.
we're like through the first 30.
Yeah.
No, we love it, Ash. Okay, so before we get into the story of the crash, we do need to cover some background information on both Michelle as well as some other people and the area, because there was a bunch of turmoil in the region, and that plays into the story.
Yeah.
So first, let's start with the country of Mozambique,
Okay.
which
Yeah.
is where Samora Machel was the president of.
Bob Dylan wrote a song about it.
Did he?
Yeah.
Really?
Came out in the 70s. I think it was right after the decolonization, and it was taken over by Marxists. And so
Oh, okay. Because
yeah.
for a second I was thinking you were talking about there was a time where Bob Marley had gone to the same region, but that was for another country, which suddenly I don't have the name of, but I know is further along in my script, and I'll call it out when we get there.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay. If your geography isn't that great with South Africa.
And not the country, the area,
The
southern
Southern
part of
Africa.
Africa.
There you
Yes.
go.
Because that, I just had a moment where I was like, you keep saying that
Mozambique.
Mozambique is a country, but then you're saying South Africa. Now I'm confused.
So the southern region of Africa.
Not South Africa.
Correct.
Okay.
If you are familiar with or not familiar with it, you will look at a map, and on the very bottom of the tip, you will see the country of South Africa. And to the right of it on the coast is Mozambique, just directly to the northeastern side. And then there's a small country sandwich in between South Africa and Mozambique, which is called Swaziland. So that's where it is. And Swaziland's an itsy bitsy teeny tiny country.
Yeah.
It's kind of sandwiched.
It's completely surrounded
It
It's
is
surrounded
totally
on-
landlocked, but it's
Yeah.
by those two countries.
But it's
Yeah.
surrounded on three sides by South Africa,
Yeah.
basically.
and one side
one
by
tiny
Mozambique.
little
yeah.
side.
Yeah.
Yeah. For about 400 years, Mozambique was a Portuguese colony. And okay, so I got to stop for a second. I knew Portugal had colonies. I didn't realize that it still had colonies this far into the modern era for some reason.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a failing on my part from a historical perspective, apparently. But I was like, it's a Portuguese colony? I thought the Portuguese lost all their colonies like 200 years ago.
No, not everything.
I mean, most places that had colonies still have colonies. Is that not accurate?
My problem is that I'm used to the British who returned all of their colonies primarily, or most of them. They don't have but like 2 colonies anymore, it feels like. And I know that's not the right number. Please don't send me an email. I know 2 isn't the correct number, but there was a lot of turmoil in the last 40 or 50 years, and they have those countries have all returned to their own governance.
Yeah, it's like
in some fashion.
most of the decolonization took place in the 60s, but there are a few held on to the 70s. Yeah.
So anyway, this was a Portuguese colony. And as Joe was just talking about, in the 60s, there was a lot of revolt against the Portuguese government. A guerrilla liberation group became very active starting around 1964, and they were openly fighting the Portuguese government. The name of this group is the Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, which is kind of a mouthful. So thankfully, everybody uses the acronym FRELIMO. which is much easier to say.
I like it better.
I do too. Frelimo fought against Portugal and made progress towards their goal of taking back the country slowly but surely. One thing that really helped them is that they weren't the only colony struggling to do this. And there was actually liberation movements in Angola, Portuguese Guinea, and as well as Mozambique. And in 1974, after fighting wars on multiple fronts, there was a coup in Portugal which brought down the existing government, and it was replaced by one that was totally willing to grant independence to the colonies. So the short version is Mozambique granted its independence in 1975, and Frelimo, being the main force, took power. They became the governance at that time, and they quite quickly kicked out the 250,000 Portuguese citizens who were living in country. So they were literally taking everything back.
That was a move a lot of African countries came to regret, though.
There was positives and there was negatives. It did leave a pretty significant gap in terms of commerce, and there were some other areas that really struggled because of it. I mean, in the end, most of them have overcome that. It took them time, as it always does.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're a colony, right, all of your infrastructure is run
by the remote power.
Colonizational power, is that a word?
Colonial.
Yeah.
That's much easier to say.
Yeah. So, I mean, as soon as they say, you know what, you're cut off. It's like...
Well, people who know how to run the machinery,
yeah. Well, it's,
kinda
it's just
yourself.
like, being like a college kid and getting cut off from your parents. All of a sudden, you have no idea what you're doing, and you have to kind of fend for yourself. And
that's a great analogy.
It's really hard.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, but luckily, most of these places have really, at least kind of figured
they've grown
it out.
up. To use your college kid analogy, they've grown up.
I do have to say, of all the countries out there that were former colonies, the ones that are consistently doing the best are the ones that were colonized by the British. I mean, they really are.
That's accurate, actually.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
If you look at Belize to India to Canada, America to where is it?
That other place?
That other place. Yeah, that other place. Yeah, even in Africa, the African countries that were colonized by the Brits, they're doing great.
Yeah.
I wonder if there was a better exit strategy that happened there.
You know what? I don't know, and I think that's a long road for us to run down.
No.
Let's not go there. Let's keep focused on Mozambique here. We're still talking about them.
Yeah, Botswana was the country I was trying to think of.
Got it. Okay. So when Frelimo came into power as the ruling government, they made the entire state a Marxist-Leninist. Is that how you say that? Leninist. Thank you. I was adding an extra L in there. A Leninist, Marxist-Leninist political organization.
That's a real formula for success.
And so what that meant is that they set up a socialist state. For its part, the Soviet Union's obviously very happy about this. They have a new friend in town, but that didn't really make everybody else in the area happy, but we'll get into that in a second. Samora Machel, he was involved with Frelimo from its beginnings.
Yeah.
He very quickly rose to power through the organization, such so that in 1970 he was elected the leader of the organization.
Okay.
So in 75, when the Portuguese left and Frelimo stepped into the government shoes, he was kind of the natural person to take over.
Sure.
And he did. It wasn't. There's a whole bunch of backstory here. He wasn't immediately just the number one guy, but we're just kind of shortening this to keep it simple.
The important thing you need to know is he was president.
He was president, and the other important thing to know is that almost immediately there was detractors who were not happy with him or Frelimo, and a counter group or counter movement began. And that was the Mozambican National Resistance, which in the beginning went by the acronym of just MNR, but later on they changed their name, and this name is sort of recent, but we'll use it just because you're going to see it in most of the reading, is Renamo. And they opposed the communist-based government, and they actually began a civil war in 1976.
Awesome.
Yeah, it didn't do. So you can see country gets its independence in 75 and then immediately goes to war with itself in the year later, like that's not a good thing.
Listen, it's just the truncated version. They're just getting all of the crap out of the way. They're doing it fast.
Yeah.
And then, they get that out of their system, and then they have a great path to become a really productive, amazing country.
There you go. That must have been the plan.
I'm not sure. I didn't look up any stats on how productive and amazing they are. But,
There's been a lot of political changes in that country over the last.
Right?
And
I mean, they've only run their country for 40 years.
Yeah,
Where were we 40 years out? Like, not good.
Not so
No.
hot. So let's keep going on. We're going to talk a little bit more about the area. Now,
Okay.
So we've got Michel. He's now in power. We talked about the neighbors, which were South Africa and Rhodesia, which is modern-day Zimbabwe. By the way, Rhodesia was the one that I was thinking of that Marley went to. He went there, did a big concert during their whole rise
We
to
also talked
independence.
about Rhodesia when we talked about the Lake City Quiet Pills.
Did we?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Rhodesian army.
You're right.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
It's all coming together.
But guys, I think we have to go to Rhodesia.
I think so.
That's what this is telling us.
We're going to
Start a
go to this country
Kickstarter.
that doesn't exist anymore because it's been renamed.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, so South Africa and Rhodesia, who are both under white control, do not like this country that is now a socialist state.
Yeah.
They're not fans of communism, and they begin to funnel support and money and weapons and shelter to the folks that are involved in Renamo, and. That's not very cool to Michel. He doesn't like that. He actually has a lot of very stern words to say to both governments for that. But then again, for his part,
he was interfering in their politics too.
yeah, because he was at the same time doing the same thing for the ANC, which is the African National Council, which eventually would take over
It's
when
African National Congress.
What's that?
African National Congress
What did I call it?
Council.
Thank you.
You're over.
Yeah, but they would, they would be the ones who would take over when the apartheid government in South Africa would eventually crumble several years later.
Like, more than several.
It took a lot
was
longer.
a
than several
long
years,
time.
Yeah.
I meant several years after the death of Michel. I apologize.
okay.
I'm mixing my timeline there.
Sure.
That's my own
Yeah.
fault.
It's like it was the 90s, I think.
Yeah, it was 94.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 94. So, yeah, they struggled against that for a long time. Okay, but let's jump ahead in time. We're going to jump ahead. We've got a little bit of the backstory of the region. Let's jump to 1986. There was a meeting of the heads of state of several different African nations being held on the 19th of October, 1986 in Mbala, Zambia. And the goal was to, using air quotes here, encourage the dictator of Zaire to stop supporting the insurgent groups that were fighting in Angola at the time. As I understand it from the reading, Michel's motivation to go there was also to help, quote unquote, encourage the other leaders there to stop supporting Renamo.
Well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? You go to a place and you say, hey, listen, yeah, I'll support you in this if you support me in that.
Yeah.
Ooh.
No, it's a give and take.
Yeah.
That's the way this works.
Yeah. That's what diplomacy is, I think.
It may be.
Diplomacy is basically threats.
Well, that's why how you know you're an American.
Okay. So Michel, along with a bunch of his staffers and journalists, they flew to this meeting on the presidential plane, which, as I'd said in the beginning, was a Tupolev Tu-134 A-3, which is a Soviet designed and
You don't
manufactured.
say.
I do.
With a name like that?
You do. It was a Soviet designed and manufactured twin-engine jetliner.
Yeah, the first thing I did when I started going into the story is I looked at the crash history of the Tupolev, and actually, it's not as bad as I thought it would be.
No, but it's not the safest plane in the world, it turns out to be, but
Probably
it's not
not.
the worst either. This type of plane, though, it had been around for, at that time, 20 years, and this particular plane had been in service with the government for 6 years. So it's a modern plane with the modern navigational
30
equipment
years
of
ago.
the time.
It had a telegraph.
It did not, but it did have a fax machine. But something to note, I always found this a little strange, is that the crew were actually Russian. They were employed by the U.S. USSR, and they operated the plane for the Mozambican government, which I don't know, something about that seems a little odd to me.
Well, they probably wanted the Russians to be changing the tapes and the bugging devices.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it
mailing
kind
them
of,
home?
yeah, I mean, a little bit makes sense to me.
I can see it as a way to, here, we'll give you this plane, for a discount, and then we'll give you a crew, and you'll just pay us for the crew. I mean, you're leasing out the crew at that point. I get it, but it always just seemed a little odd to me.
Yeah, I
Probably
guess
at
you
least-
don't even have to be leasing the crew, right? I mean, if
They could just pay them directly, too.
or if the USSR is
They were
being
Soviet
nefarious enough.
employees.
Yeah, I mean, if the Soviet Union is really just trying to play that role of like Big Brother, like, yes, we will take you, to encourage them to continue the Soviet way or a socialist way.
So this is one of those things they do as kind of a small gesture of support, is what you're getting at?
And then also, get tons of intel and
True.
all that stuff.
Because they're bugging the plane, as Joe
Yeah.
said.
I'm sure they were.
Well, let's, so enough about the crew. We're going back to the date of the 19th of October of that 86. The meeting ended, and because Michel had, as the reading always says, he had an important meeting the next day, which it turned out was actually his wife's birthday, though a lot of people say that he also had some other quote-unquote really important meetings that he had to attend.
Let's be honest, you're a married man.
Yeah, it's his wife's birthday.
Yeah.
That's a very
important.
important
Yes.
meeting to be there for.
So, well, she was with him, so they had gone to Mbala, and she had gone with him, and so rather than, they'd been offered to stay overnight.
Yeah, she probably didn't really want to.
Yeah, they didn't want to, so he said, no, we're going to go home today.
Probably would have
And-
been a good idea to be flying during the day, though.
Yeah.
Less likely to crash, eh?
Yeah. So what happens here is they decide that they're going to go ahead. They're going to fly home to Maputo City, which is in the capital of Mozambique, and the plane leaves at 6:40 at night. And it takes kind of this serpentine path, but it flies basically southeast towards Maputo. And the weather is clear, and the flight's estimated to take about 3 hours, just under, actually.
Okay.
From here, we know what happened because of the fact that what were recovered were the cockpit voice recorders, the CVR, and the flight data recorder, or the black box, as everybody likes to call them.
And all those bugs that the Russians had placed.
And none of the bugs that the Russians had placed. So we've got all that data. At 9 o'clock that night, they've obviously left and they're flying home. At 9 o'clock that night, the crew contacted Maputo Air Traffic Control to let them know that they're about 40 minutes out. And then 16 minutes later...
And was this a moonless night, by the way?
It was not, but it was a small moon, if I remember right, and the moon had not yet risen.
Ah.
The moon wouldn't rise until shortly after the crash. Like, literally 10 minutes after the crash, what moon there was would have come up.
Okay.
So that would have maybe helped things here. Like I said, they contact the air traffic control. They say they're about 40 minutes out. 16 minutes later, they contact them again and let them know that they're ready to begin their descent.
That's about right.
Yeah.
Yeah. 30-minute descent.
Yeah, 25 minutes,
Typical.
something like that. Yeah. It's at this point that I should explain something about how the plane was navigating to Maputo, and that is that they were using a VHS omnidirectional radio rangefinder, which we are from here on going to call a VOR, because that's much easier.
Was that actually a rangefinder, or was that just a beacon?
It's a beacon,
Yeah.
but that's part of the name. In a nutshell, what the VOR is it's a signal that's broadcast from a location that allows the pilot to determine their relation to that beacon.
Yeah, they head to the light. Yeah.
And
Essentially.
it's because there's a phase-matched pair of signals that are being sent, and through that match or mismatch, they can tell how far they are off in a 360-degree circle.
Is it like sonar?
No, not exactly. Here's how it works.
Thank you, because I'm
Yeah, no,
lost.
and believe me, I got a hold of our experts. Thank you to all of our experts for their help with this. I really hope this makes sense. Here's what happens is there is a signal, I believe it's a pulsing signal that is constantly being sent out.
like a ping.
like a ping. At the same time, and that's being sent out in all directions at the same time. At the same time, there is a second signal being sent out, and in the old days, it used to be from a antenna that was actually a physically rotating antenna, and it would rotate 20 to 30 times a minute, but it is then also in a directional fashion shooting out that signal so that they both start in line at true north. And so if it then rotates 90 degrees to the east, it's a quarter out of sync. Due south, it's now half out of sync, and then 3/4, and then they sync back up because the new rotation starts. I hope that makes sense. Basically, it's a spiral on top of another circle. Is how it works. It allows them to figure out where they are in relation to it.
It probably makes sense enough for it to matter.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other thing to remember is these are at the airports that they're heading for, and other airports have them also, but on different radio frequencies.
Correct. They are not set on the same frequency.
No, that would be confusing.
Well, and the thing is that they also send out, back in the day, they would send out a Morse code signal at the same time that would say, essentially, this is Maputo Airport, over and over and over and over, so that you didn't tune into it and start to fly to it and then realize you were going to the wrong airport. You could pick that code up right away.
But would you use other airport signals to navigate off of? Like knowing, hey, we're 2 hours into the flight, we should be passing this city.
If I understand it correctly, yes.
Okay.
It is a method of navigation, not only to a specific destination, but to know where you are in relation to other places.
Okay.
As you pass through their signal path.
Yeah, you could actually just use a compass and autopilot, I think, for most of it, and then just do corrections off when you pass an airport, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Adjust your
Right.
course.
But I
Exactly.
just wanted to make sure that that would be a thing that they would be switching between frequencies during the flight.
They could be, yes.
Great.
So the flight crew is using the Maputo VOR. That's how they're guiding into the airport because that's where they're going.
Or at least, I don't know if they actually picked it up yet. But
They had. The
had
VOR,
They were only
they-
a half hour out.
They were half hour
shoulda.
out, Joe. The VORs have a range of up to 200 miles.
Yeah.
And they were 40 minutes out, which made them about 60 miles or so away from the airport. So they were definitely in its range. And they were definitely going to be picking it up.
They were flying that slow?
Well, they were coming
Apparently.
in they were about to descend. You don't start to descend 200 miles out, do you?
I don't know.
The point is, they were within its envelope. They had definitely been picking it up, and they had tuned into it because that's where they were going to head to. They go ahead and, like I said, they tell air traffic control that they're going to start their descent. Air traffic control says, "Listen, go ahead and tell us when your altitude reaches 3,000 feet, or if you see our runway lights, contact us then, and then we'll talk." Yeah, I know. It's really funny.
And we're talking clear night?
Yes, clear night, not a cloudy night, anything like that.
Okay.
The mystery really gets going at about 9:10 at night because that's when the plane, for a reason that nobody knows, made a 37-degree turn to the right. So it banked and turned